Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. In this video, we're gonna get a few evergreen shrubs under control here in the garden. Not a whole lot, really, just some branches that are growing outside of where we're trying to maintain the plant, or the shape of that we're trying to maintain the plant. Video would have gone up before this on some deciduous summer flowering shrubs, including butterfly bush and a couple of hydrangeas you can prune this time of year in late February. This one's going to be on evergreen shrubs that are kind of either summer blooming, or we just don't rely on the plants for flowers at all. You don't want to be pruning things right now that are about to flower. So as an example, I'll show you when we get back to the lower petalum, they're about to bloom. We wouldn't want to be pruning those right now because I'd be pruning the flowers off of them. This Radiance Abelia out here in the front garden never needs a whole lot of maintenance. It's not fussy. You can see how showy they are. This is February. This is the least showy they are. But they don't bloom until July, sometime in there, and then they bloom July, August, September, October, November until it gets cold, and then that kind of shuts them down. They do tend to get a little bit of spiky kind of growth on the top of them here or there, and we're trying to maintain them at a certain width across the front. So I can just generally go through and use my head shears and prune back some of this material that is just sticking out further than I want it, or growing into another plant, that kind of thing. Quick and easy with the head shears on that. If you have any, I really don't see it very much on Radiance. A lot of the newer variegated Abelia are very stable, meaning that the variegation, it just grows as a variegated plant all the time. Some of the older varieties of variegated Abelia can get green sports on them. So if you get a big green piece coming out on the side of it, you need to cut that off quickly. And that's not a timing thing, it just needs to go away, because the green foliage has more chlorophyll, it can grow faster. Eventually it will, slowly but surely, the plant will revert back entirely to green. And again, I'm just going to shape these going back at an angle. I would recommend on most of your evergreen shrubs that you try to have some sort of angle that comes up that allows the sun to reach the bottom of them. So if you're pruning, let's say, a wall of ligustrum or boxwoods or anything that you're creating a kind of a vertical wall with, slope it back slightly so that the sun can reach down to the bottom of the plant, because otherwise you end up with them thin underneath if the sunlight can't get to them. The spiky growth is the only thing on these I treat differently. I'll show you that in just a second. Again, these just don't need much. I'm about to fertilize, and then we're about to mulch, and so I'm trying to do all this cleanup now before we mulch, so that I'm not in the beds making a mess on top of my mulch. On these variegated Abelia, you will get this kind of spiky growth that will come up, kind of out of the middle of it, and it runs pretty far down into the plant. When you prune this off, if I just use the head shears going across the top of this spiky growth, it outpaces the rest of the plant, and it will just be spiky again like this. I want a natural look out of these. I'm making them a little formal this morning, but I'm not going to prune them again the rest of the season, because they bloom in the summertime, and I just won't have another opportunity to prune them. So I'm pruning them back a little formal, and then I'm going to let them look natural over the rest of the year. This stuff right here will come back up really quickly if I don't track it way down in the plant, as far down as I can go, and prune that piece out. Okay, that's kind of the key here, is to get this growth is just a little different. It's like not dwarf. And all of these Abelia will do this here and there, but just track that stuff way down in the plant and get rid of it. That way it will still grow a little faster, but it takes some time for it to get back up out of the plant. But it's quick and easy, really. Not any big deal. Not any big deal at all. And then I'll go across the rest of the top of it. I missed it. Okay. There's one right here. And there's one right here. And I think the rest of this is just kind of pretty normal growth. So I'll grab my head shears and just shape up the rest of it. With that spikiness off of the top of it, I'll just go through here and get some of the shaggy growth off of it. And I'm making it look a little formal today, but it won't. By a month, 2 months from now, once they start putting on some growth, it'll have a mind of its own. It won't look so formal. But I know that they'll grow about a foot before they bloom, and so I have to reduce some size on them. They bloom on new growth during the season, and so they're gonna have to get bigger to flower. And so I need to make sure I'm not allowing them to get, eat the whole bed when they put on that foot of growth. And I'm trying to kind of disconnect the plants this time of year. The plants that grew into one another last year, I'm trying to put a little bit of air and space between them, at least temporarily. Once the new growth starts on them, they'll fill back in, but at least for some period of time here, light can get down in the bottom of these between the individual plants. We have these Leanne Clayera out front, and the new growth on these during the spring and summer is this really intense burgundy red color. They do get a little bit of damage on the very end of last year's growth. This is pretty typical. Some of these leafy evergreen shrubs really don't have an off switch, and they just kind of keep growing until it gets cold, and then they take a little bit of burn like that, and just on the very tips of them, and then they go to sleep reluctantly, and then they wake back up and start growing again. This is a screening size shrub, really. These can get 8 to 10 feet tall and be used as a screening plant. We've just been using them as a backdrop in the middle of this bed. There are 5 of them, and it's going to go down to 3 in a plan we have coming up for this spring. But for now, there's still 5, and I want to see this kind of intense new growth on them. This little spot of growth that's almost like a red tip Photinia used to be, if you guys are familiar with red tip Photinia, as they're coming out in the spring. And all I want to do is go through here and take off some of this kind of tattered growth on the top of these so that we get more of that. By the time mid-spring rolls around, I'll be rearranging these. We may use a couple of them on the foundation planting coming up, but really that's all I'm trying to accomplish here. Is also where I'm making some of these indiscriminate cuts is what these are. We'll get some branching on them, so I'll get 2 spiky pieces coming up with even more color on them. If they're wider than I want, this is definitely the opportunity to go in here and take them out. Again, I said I am pruning plants that either bloom in the summer. You can take a rake and go across the top of this to pull all this stuff out. But I leave most of this stuff. I'll leave and let it just mulch itself underneath, because we're about to mulch. We're going to use hardwood mulch out here. And so these small little cut pieces, they can just lay in place, mulch go over top of them. The other part of the process coming up is we're going to be fertilizing. That'll be in the next few days, actually, once I get some of this pruning accomplished. And this, for me, is just taking spiky growth off the top of evergreen plants. One other point I was going to make about this, I said already, is that we're pruning things that flower in the summertime, and we're pruning things that we just kind of don't rely on for flowering. So that maybe would be conifers, and I'm about to prune a little bit of a conifer here. That would be boxwoods, Japanese hollies. Those are flowering plants, but we're not typically, we're not showing off the flowers on our, Japanese hollies. Same thing with this Clayera. It's a flowering plant. It's not anything to have a conversation about. So I'm just treating it as just an evergreen plant. So right here at the end of winter is when I prune them. Flowering plants are the ones you have to think about the timing on to make sure you're not cutting flower buds off of them. This is just really, I showed in the other pruning video a little more refined technique on, pruning things down to buds, kind of controlling where the growth is going to come out. But on an evergreen shrub like this, there's really no real reason to need to be that exacting. They'll just flush right back out from this. This is one that's probably a bit more scary for folks overall, are going to be conifers, where you're doing a little bit of shaping on conifers. I had gold mop Camellias back at the old house that I would cut 6 feet off of about every 5th year. It grew pretty fast, and I could just absolutely cut it down. But that was a well-established plant, and I'm doing it not really in peak summer. So this nightlight Camellias, this is about as tall as I want to maintain it. So I'm going to take about 6 inches of height out of it right now. It's not going to look that great for a week or two, 4 to 6 weeks, something like that. But as it puts on new growth, it'll look fantastic. I would not want to do this in peak summer, because the sun hitting the interior of this plant would probably do some significant damage to it. So I'm doing it in late February. Plant looks fantastic. It's one of our absolute favorite plants out here, but it's just going to continue to get bigger. That's the thing with these, these plants, even dwarf plants or slow growing plants. They're still, this is a dwarf hinoki. It's not going to stop growing. It's a dwarf hinoki, but it's still, I've seen dwarf hinokis 15 feet tall, so it's not, it's just slower. It's not truly small. Make sure when you're pruning conifers like this that your tools are very sharp. There's a little bit of sappiness to it inside the plant, and it will gum up your tools pretty quickly if they're not sharp. Well, even if they are sharp, but if they're the combination of dull, that gumminess will get on there, and it just will make the most ragged cuts on your conifer, which you don't want. We want good, clean cuts. And I could go through here and really take my hand pruners and just take one of these and make them, absolutely perfect cuts like that, if I wanted to, with my hand pruners. I've done this long enough that I'm not worried about it. I'm just going to go for it. And I'm going to ultimately take about 6 inches down off of this thing, letting some light back down to the bottom of it. It's got a hole in the back of it where one of these Leafy and a crinum lily has laid on the back of it. So this light will be helpful to fill that back in. I like on these kind of bald things to start down on the side and work my way up to the top like that, okay? That's a pretty good technique for making sure you end up with something that still looks like a ball when you're done. Or you can start from the top and go over the side like that. But I find it easier to, to go up to the top like that. Okay, got a blueberry back here behind it. I tried to scalp off by accident just then. Let me come over to that other side real quick. We don't have many formal plants in the garden, but this one kind of does grow with a bit of a formal habit. You can take your hand on one of these conifers like this and just kind of shake it to get all the material off that I just cut off of it. That will turn brown and it won't look very good on the top of it. Again, make sure your tools are sharp if you're out pruning conifers, because they will get gummed up pretty quickly. And you can use some Goo Gone or something like that to clean them afterwards to try to get them back clean before you put them away. But nice clean cuts are the key to making these conifers look good. I kind of meatballed this because that's the natural shape it takes. The Radiance Abelia back there, the Leafy, and now the Nightlight Camellias. This is how they kind of grow in this perfect little round dome shape. I I angled them down a bit over here to make sure the sun can get down to the bottom of them. And but I just did a, kind of a, meatball looking pruning approach to them. I'm not going to prune them again for a long time. So I'm going to let them come back out and kind of take, a slightly more natural look, but that's kind of the growth they have anyway. This dwarf hinoki cypress, I would definitely not prune that way. It has this kind of spiky, it has a lot of character to it. It's not the type of plant that I'd come in here and cut the top off of and shear the sides and make it look like a rectangle, because it's just not the type of growth. These are both Camellias. This one was bred to have a formal kind of round meatball kind of look to it. It's soft and airy and that kind of thing, but it does have that look to it. This I would prune, I'm trying to grow it upright and narrow, so this little side branch that's sticking out over here, I might come down into the side of it and take that off just to kind of keep it narrower. And why don't we just do that instead of talking about it. Easier said than done. And that's all I did, is just kind of take that piece that's, I don't want it wider than that. If I had a piece up here at the top that I wanted to control some size on, I would follow it down into the plant and prune it lower in the plant so that I left the top of it kind of spiky. So just analyze your plants. Is it a plant that's just kind of naturally growing in a formal shape? Or is it a plant that kind of has an informal habit to it? You may need to prune those differently, to keep them looking, in kind of a natural look. This one has, it's called Nightlight Camellias, and it was bred for this yellow new growth on it, or selected for this yellow new growth on it. Well, I just cut all the yellow off of it, but all the new growth will be bright gold yellow and look fantastic. But we're 4, 5, 6 weeks away from that. I came across the street just to show you these boxwoods and these dwarf Yopon hollies. These are also examples of things I'd be pruning this time of year. So February in warmer areas, March in colder areas, anything that you're not relying on to be flowering. And I could come in here, like they do, and meatball these. Maybe I'd want to get them down below this window so you could really hard prune them this time of year. You can, whether you're pruning it in a natural form and selecting branches out of it to prune, or you're just meatballing them, whatever you're doing, this is the time of year to do it. Just make sure it's things you're not relying on for flowering, or they flower on new growth later in the summer. Things that flower in the spring, leafy evergreen things that flower in the spring, and examples of that would be azaleas, rhododendrons, loropetalum, these things that are going to flower in the next few weeks. We definitely don't want to be pruning them. So let's take a look at a couple of those. Here's the Carolina Midnight loropetalum. You can see the flowers about to start opening on them. Again, you can prune. Sometimes you have to prune something and flowers, and not care about the flowers. If you wanted to get this thing under control or needed to do it immediately, that would be fine. You're not hurting the plant. You're just going to sacrifice the flowers. But I'm going to wait a few weeks, enjoy it flowering, and then really I got to get after this loropetalum big time. It's 12 feet tall. Down here below it is another thing in the same witch hazel family as the loropetalum, and blooming at the same time. Notice the witch hazels would be blooming right now for most people. The loropetalum's about to bloom. The Distilleum here is in bloom as well. These aren't, really that showy, so, pruning the Distilleum and sacrificing the flowers probably isn't that big of a deal. But this is the time of year they're flowering, and these, again, any of this spring flowering stuff, we're going to prune it after it flowers and not before. A couple of more plants to point out, and then we'll prune Camellia before we wrap this up. This is a Miss Lemon Abelia. Same thing, a few spiky pieces of growth on it. We'll chase those down into the plant. The rest of the plant will just get a kind of a general haircut. This is kind of the growth habit it has, is this low mounding habit. So I'm going to put it in a low mounding habit, but then I'm going to leave it alone. I don't want to meatball it over and over and over all year, and it blooms all summer long. I'm going to meatball it and then allow it to take its natural form. If you never wanted to meatball it, and you're absolutely free to do that, you can just take all the limbs that are running out from the center and chase those down into the ground, and then you could still leave a bit of shagginess on the plant without pruning it off. My patience for that is just, I got a lot going on, and so I'd rather just come out here, take these down into the plant and then reset the thing entirely, and then let it grow naturally during the season so that it, takes on a more natural look over the course of several months. My Florida Sunshine Illicium, it flowers, but they're like yellow, yellowish white color, almost the exact same as the foliage, so you really don't see them all that much. This, I had thought this was two different plants. Sometimes, you know, you will get containers where they've put 2, 3, 4 cuttings in the same container. That the reason I had this kind of horizontal habit down here at the bottom and this upright habit, but I've tracked it back down into the middle of the plant. It's just one plant, but there's one branch from the bottom that grows horizontal like this, and then the other one that grows upright. I think I'm going to root a few of these that are going horizontal like this and see if they'll continue to trail across the ground like they're doing. Literally, this thing's growing across the ground. So once it's rooted in, I'm going to cut it away and see if that's just a different, that form is a spreading low one like that. With this, I just want to slow this growth down some up here at the top, so see if I can fill a little bit of this in. I did this last year and it's filled in a little bit. So I'm not going to take this all the way down into the bottom of the plant. Just do a little bit more selective pruning than what you've seen in this video so far. We're going to do that with the Camellia over there as well. And I'm pruning them to where there's a leaf right on top right there, so you really can't see that I pruned it off. When you do selective pruning like this, you can kind of hide the fact that you pruned it a bit. This has that anise scent that you would expect from Illicium. Deer don't typically eat them, but every time I say to deer, don't typically eat something, somebody down at the bottom of the video said, deer ate mine. But this one is very, kind of a, very pungent smell, so be weird for a deer to select this of all things to eat. But that's all I'm going to do on this, and then go around this shaggy part that's getting wider than I want it to get and prune some of that off. And that'll be that. I'm going to leave that other side on over there so that I can see if I can root this thing as a prostrate Illicium on the back over there. But that's pretty much all I'm going to do on this, and just see if I can even some of this part out by slowing this part down. We have this very fast growing screenplay holly, and in fact it doubled in height last year, but it's got these 3 spiky pieces of growth up on the top of it, and I would like for this thing to kind of come up more even than it's going to come up. When you see this kind of thing, you can prune this kind of stuff off anytime. I always get the questions about, one crazy limb on something. That's the kind of stuff you can cut anytime. Those kind of random branches up on the top of that Illicium, things like that, you can just do them anytime. That spikiness on those Abelia. But again, I'll follow these. You can see they're just more vigorous shoots. And so we can just we can just follow this thing way down in there, right? That was all growth from the end of the season. That's what I mean by a more vigorous shoot. See where it's still green? Hasn't turned the brown color that you would expect on the, or greenish brown color that you would expect of the bark on this. And again, so I want to follow these way down in there. You can see this is all growth. For some reason, this one just took off and decided to grow like that at the end of the season. And mulch in place, chop and drop, a lot of different names for this technique of cutting something off and just laying it next to it so that it becomes part of the mulch. We'll mulch over top of it later. This one is not going way down into the plant, but it's just sticking up way above everything else. And that's all I'll do on it. Not trying to make a formal look out of it. What I'm trying to do is have the whole plant come up and create a screen here, and not just 3 weird branches up at the top of it. So that's an easy technique to prune it without it looking like I pruned it, really. Some Camellia species bloom in the fall and into early winter. Some bloom in late winter, early spring. There's some coming to market that bloom in the summer, which is going to be wild. And then there's some that kind of linger over both fall and spring. We've got a japonica that does that. It's a fall blooming Camellia japonica. Still had a couple flowers on it that was right next to that Illicium we just pruned. The Camellia sasanquas, the fall blooming ones, this is one of them. This is Camellia sasanqua October Magic Orchid. Beautiful, beautiful flowers on this. It has a really compact habit, but what you'll notice, and this is true on a lot of shrubs, is you'll get this kind of spiky growth that will come up above it, just like we saw on the Abelia. And that's all I'm going to prune out on it. I don't want to meatball my Camellias. I like the growth habit that this was selected for. It's kind of got this neat layering look to it, but it does get these kind of crazy branches that come way up above the plant. If I just prune them right to the top of it, they're more vigorous than the rest of the plant, and they're immediately going to shoot right back up. So again, this is that same technique of going way down in the plant and cutting that whole branch out. I think that thing's, I'm 6 foot tall, so it's nearly 5 feet, 5 foot branch that came out of there. I'm gonna go way down in there. Again, make sure your tools are sharp. That's kind of the key to any of this kind of pruning. These branches get thicker as we go down into the plant. There's just maybe 6 or 8 of these. And then if I've got from there, if I've got a branch, you know, this branch is heading toward the wall over here, okay? So I just cut a little bit of it off. And I've got one growing up into the palm on the other side. So let's just kind of give those two a little bit of air. This spiky one that's on here, I don't want to trace it all the way down into the plant, but if I cut it just above one of these side branches, then, you know, after I cut it, it stands back up and it doesn't look like I cut it. If you see an obvious one that's coming up in the middle of it that looks like it's going to be one of those spiky ones, you can go ahead and track it down into the plant. But that was only 8, 10, 12 cuts, something like that. And immediately it's a full little compact shrub again, but I didn't turn it into a meatball. Camellias are much slower to respond from heavy pruning. And so if I meatballed it, it would basically be meatballed for the rest of the year. Whereas these Abelia, even the Loropetalum, when I prune those later in the season, azaleas, boxwoods, whatever it is, the meatball-y kind of plants that were bred to look like, you know, little round balls, they're going to come back out pretty quick and grow pretty quick. This would not. So I want to keep it in this natural shape. That's what we're doing here in the garden in Raleigh, North Carolina, is looking for things that we either don't rely on for flowers or things that have already flowered. Everything else we'll wait on for them to flower, and then we'll prune them if needed. And I want to emphasize in this video that you don't have to prune anything. There's nothing out here that it has to 100% be pruned. We're packing a lot of plants into a very small lot here in Raleigh, and it's going to require us to, you know, size control things occasionally in order to keep this many plants growing together in a small space. So thank you guys so much for following along with the channel, and don't forget to subscribe to be around for the next one. Thanks for watching.